Welcome back, Immanuel, to Third Hour. It's a place where Dan and I sit down with the other pastors here at Immanuel Bible Church and ask them questions about practical Christian living, the same questions that you're asking yourself. Today we're joined by Michael Connor, our pastor of mission and outreach here at Immanuel Bible Church. Thanks for coming, Michael.
Very good to be with you all.
Thanks. I'd like to ask, just to start off, how are things for you and your family with all that's going on?
We are well, thank God. We are well, have two adult children, both married. My son has two children. His wife is a nurse, works in a hospital. There are COVID patients there down in Lynchburg, Virginia. So we pray a lot for Becky, for Andrew, and unfortunately can't see them. Holidays come and go. We're not able to see those grandkids, which is tough. Mm-hmm. But my son-in-law had been furloughed from his work, which lost like 85% of their business, but was just among a small handful that was called back. So they're doing pretty well. I have a 91-year-old mother. She's doing very well. She can't exercise her first spiritual gift, which is hugging, but other than that, she's doing very well. So we thank God.
Excellent, yeah. I know for a lot of us, this was probably our first Easter where we didn't go to church and gather.
Yeah.
My youngest one really got in the spirit and made sure she put on her Easter dress, but the rest of us kind of huddled around our iPads. And just what was Easter like for you?
Well, it strips away things that don't really matter, and usually I get that kind of annoyance at Christmas time, where there's so much falderall, there's so much this, that, and the other, which really is not representative of or in celebration of the incarnation. And really the same thing is true with Easter. But the nice thing is when you strip all those things away in your heart and with your family and with your Christian family online, you can worship God for the resurrection. If the resurrection can happen, anything can happen. Nothing in this world should give us more hope than the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. God took the dead man, rose him to life, and he reigns in glory. A God that can do that can do anything.
Yeah, with man it's impossible, with God
all things are possible.
Speaking about our kind of extended Christian family, I think in your role here at the church, maybe better than most folks, you have your finger on the pulse with what's going on globally around the world. So maybe you could help us who are confined and constrained to the Northern Virginia area to think just globally about how this virus is impacting the world and specifically the Christian world.
Well, that's a good question. It really does take a lot of thought, because profound things are happening in our country and really all over the world. And just to think about what's happening and what the implications of those things will be for the future is largely unknown. I wonder if any of us really know how the world is going to look as we emerge from this. But some things I've thought about, I did read one day that 93% of the world, 93% of the people in the world are observing some type of lockdown. I really wonder if there's ever been such a common global experience. And so it makes people who are living far away, they're sharing an experience. So I think in some ways it makes the world smaller, as does being in touch by video with most people. That can happen with someone who's around the world, and it can happen with your next door neighbors. So I think those things will serve to shrink the world and bring people who are farther away more to our remembrance, more into our prayers. Now, on the other hand, I think these times of plague, virus, they've always kind of caused people to put up walls, because maybe this is an influence or a sickness that's coming from the outside. So people get very scared of foreigners or people that are different from them, someone that may represent a threat. And so it could be a time where more borders and walls are going up. But I hope that won't be the case.
Is the pandemic affecting countries in Europe and Africa in the same way as America? Obviously, there's different kinds of responses from the government, but just boots on the ground. I mean, you know a lot more people than the average person who live in different countries. What's their daily reality like in comparison with ours?
Well, I think country by country, Europe probably has the highest amount of exposure, and they've had a lot of deaths, and a lot of countries have taken strong measures. You have ability in those countries to have more social control, I think, and more hospitals, more police forces, more centralized government. So I think the experience is different there. Europe has really been hit very hard by this virus, and some of our workers there have been in some of the more extreme situations. Africa, it's give or take some, or hit or miss, I guess would be a better way to say that. Some countries are observing a strong lockdown. Others have a lot of other problems that may be even more major on their scale than COVID-19.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we've been kind of tracking, even just in the Foundry, because we're going through the book of Joel, is the current locust plague that's devastating East Africa right now. I mean, at the same time as COVID-19. Are there other things that are going on in the world? I mean, it seems like we're all kind of focused on this one thing, but are there other things like that are happening around the world that we're just not even cognizant of?
Well, you did mention that locust plague in East Africa, which is certainly a major thing these days. I can't imagine just billions of locusts descending on an area and leaving virtually nothing that's green. It's hard to imagine a situation like that. Some Ebola coming out of Congo and Central Africa. I think when you need central government to step in and exercise more control and put more strictures on populations, I don't think that's real good for democracies. It tends to strengthen totalitarian societies because, in a sense, people want them. They want the security of that. And some of them are using this to pummel their enemies or to gain more control. So that'll be a concern going forward.
Yeah. How about for Christians? We know that the world is in upheaval, and certainly we're, as Christians, affected by all of that.
Yeah.
We're not aloof to it, so heavenly minded that we're of no earthly good. Obviously, we see all of the panic and the hurt and the pain around us. But is there anything that's kind of a steady state reality that you see going on in the global church, whether it's in China or in South America or Africa or even here? Is there some kind of common thread that you hear from Christians all around the world?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, Dan. That's a good question too. I think there's positives and negatives. I think on the negative side, certainly gathering in local churches is what we're commanded to do in Scripture. We're supposed to practice the one another's. We're supposed to be an ecclesia, a called out group of people who love one another despite differences in age and wealth and social backgrounds. So the fact that the churches are not meeting around the world is a difficult thing. And I think people miss that infusion of hope and promise from their friends or hearing from the Word. I think this is a very difficult time for pastors of many churches around the world. We're blessed to have the ability to communicate with people via video. We have online giving possibilities. This just isn't the case for most of the churches of the world. I think for national pastors, this is a very tough time. Now, on the positive side, I think Christians generally have an attitude about this and about the sovereignty of God and the settledness of their lives, that they really can shine like stars against a dark night. This is a time where there's a lot of despair, a lot of hopelessness, and Christians don't necessarily have that. So I think it's becoming an opportunity to witness. I've heard that in China, where facial recognition in China is something that really does a lot of social control. Well, when everybody has their masks on, they can't tell who's just talking and who's sharing the gospel, and apparently the evangelists in China have really taken advantage of the mask policy to share their faith without being caught in facial recognition.
Wow.
People in the Middle East are telling us that they sometimes are having more profound interactions with people over the internet and texting and more anonymous third-party ways of communicating in societies where it's really tough to even ask a good question about Jesus for fear of what your peers would say. So the anonymity is helping in some instances. One of our missionaries that's there talks about interaction with students that have gotten deeper and more profound. Another one that's working in a country that's almost entirely Muslim had a time where he was doing devotions and a few people would come. Well, now he's doing it online and he has 132 people that are following his daily devotional. All kinds of people who wouldn't come out and do that are listening to him online. So I think in all these things we say, as Joseph did, you intended this for evil, God intended it for good, for the salvation of many. And that's what our hope should be.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'd love to ask, and maybe you could help me understand better. Just how this is impacting missionaries. If I remember correctly, you were a missionary outside of the States.
Yeah, 10 years in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast in West Africa.
And I recently learned that your wife was as well, right?
Yeah, she was, we met in a 3-month missionary training. She was headed to the Philippines where she was part of an evangelistic music group. And I went to Côte d'Ivoire, which pretty much is opposite ends of the world. We developed a relationship there pre-anything video or even email, dating myself a little bit there. But yeah, she was in Asia for 3 years, but then I recruited her to be with me in Africa.
Well, I'd love to, maybe you can help me know how this is affecting some of our Immanuel Bible Church missionaries around the world.
I think, as I said before, it's kind of a mixed bag. There's definitely things that this time makes life hard for our missionaries. Maybe more on the positive side, though, our missionaries largely are very adept at being in touch by video. I mean, this is how most of them are staying in touch with their families in their home countries, staying in touch with supporting churches. They already have a structure for this, and so they're using it. And on the other hand, I would say for a lot of our missionaries, travel is a very important part of what they do. You think of Henry and Ruthie in Paris, but I mean, they really have responsibilities all over the Middle East. They're traveling weekly, and that's been on hold. Alvin and Kristen teach up at Lancaster Bible College, but he runs the largest region of Asia for one of the largest mission organizations. And they're even using him some in the Middle East now too. So that guy is always on a plane, and it's had to change. Just as we've had to adapt and do a lot more by video, a lot of them are finding that they need to be doing the same thing. Some are in countries where there's pretty severe restrictions. One of our couples in the Middle East who just had a baby, basically in that country you cannot leave your house. You have to even order food and groceries into your house. You're not allowed. If you're on the street, you get stopped. And another one in Asia says they can get to the grocery store, but only one, and you have to go between 3 or 4 police checkpoints, and then you get to the grocery store and they'll take your temperature before they let you in the store. So some people, I think of the Pewits in Spain, are just living with more severe implications of this disease, and so their life is disrupted a little bit more.
What do you think are some of the chief needs for those missionaries who are being affected by this? Particularly for those of us in the States, hey, maybe we can't go out of our homes, but maybe there are ways that we can be supporting our missionaries well, even more intentionally now than before. Maybe we have more free time, more resources. What might that look like for us to support our missionaries well right now?
I have heard a number of them say that they feel isolated. They really feel like they're almost locked up where they are, and that's true. A lot of us feel the same thing. I think in that isolation, it's calls or video chats or FaceTime things are very welcome. This is like a a balm or a cup of cold water from a distant land, as the scripture says. This can be a very encouraging thing, just to be in touch and say, hey, we were thinking about you, or want to pray for you, want to know what your requests are. They seem to really be grateful when I'm getting in touch with different ones. And one ABF president wrote to me for updates on their class missionaries and wanted to know ways to get in touch with them. I think that would be a tremendous thing. I think support is going to be an interesting thing coming out of this. Will our own church giving, will other churches giving, how is it going to be affected by a lengthy shutdown like this? Will we really be able to continue support of missionaries as we have in the past, or as other churches have in the past? And I think that's going to be a real challenge. Overall giving, but people may not know that about half of our ministry budget, not our overall budget with the salaries in the building and all that, but of the ministry budget, about half of that goes to missions. And I would hope that we'd be able to maintain that, but it's an open question based on kind of how finances go.
Right. Yeah. Are there specific advantages, or you mentioned earlier, kind of opportunities that you've seen that have opened up among our missionaries because of the situation? Like, we hear even just locally about people who are considering death more seriously, and because of that want to talk more about the gospel. Have you heard from any of our missionaries that they've plugged into any of those kinds of opportunities as a result of this?
Yes. This is a sober time. People are sick, they're dying, their economies have gone haywire. This is a time when people reassess. Some countries where really spiritual conversations are very difficult, like France, Spain, our missionaries from there are reporting that they are having more in-depth spiritual conversations with people as they deal with the sobering effects of this virus. I just got an email yesterday from Dick and Ruth Browning, who work among First Nation Native Americans in Canada. And they said last week there was a family, a husband and a wife and 2 teenage daughters, that were just very scared about their lives. They were thinking about eternity. And so they agreed to meet, and all 4 of them gave their lives to Christ last week, and then participated in some of their online stuff over the weekend.
Praise God.
You mentioned, ABF presidents reaching out. So for some of the folks here at Immanuel that feel a burden to want to be that cup of cold water, to reach out, but they don't know who to get in touch with or how to get in touch with, how would you encourage them to find a missionary to get in touch with?
Most of the ABFs have a group of missionaries that they track with, and there's usually somebody, the president would know, or maybe there's a missions representative for the class who would know how to get in touch with them. If you don't have anybody like that, get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to forward some contact information from some of the ones in the different ABF classes.
Michael, just in closing, if you could say one thing, just looking at the camera, to the folks at Immanuel to encourage them at a time like this, given obviously the whole conversation here about missions, but also just your own pastoral insight for our body, what would you want to encourage them with? What would you want to tell them? How would you want to exhort and bless the folks of Immanuel?
I think we have to take every situation that God gives us and realize that He is sovereign, that He can redeem it. We were talking about Easter. We were talking about all the things that the world or Satan intends for evil, but God can really redeem those things. He can turn it around. Joseph was right. He said to his brothers, "You put me in this pit, intended to kill me, made me a slave." All of that was for harm. It was for evil. But God had a bigger plan. You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. This is a virus is an evil thing. It attacks people. It kills them. It debilitates them. But the circumstances that it produces, where maybe we have more time for prayer, more time for scriptures, more time to be in touch with extended family. We've done 2 Zoom calls with extended family out of North Dakota. We've never done that before. Well, this has been produced by this difficult time, but it's something good that's come out of it. So look for the good, stay positive, realize that God can redeem absolutely anything. If he can bring a dead man out of a grave, he can do anything in your situation. He can redeem it. Even if you're not working, even if you're fearful, you can move ahead, you can trust him, and he can produce remaining fruit through your life, through the situations that you face.
Amen.
One thing before we get out of here, you've piqued my interest. I am familiar with a theology of foot washing in the church, but you have a theology of hand washing. I want to hear this.
So, of course, I'm washing my hands so much all the time. One guy said he washed his hands so much that the answers to his 8th grade science test reemerged. But there I was at the sink, and it was always Old MacDonald, and I was clucking here and quacking there, and it's like, what a colossal waste of time. So I went back to my mantra. It's mantra-like. I don't know whether you guys have a mantra, but for much of my life, I've had this little expression that kind of plays in my mind. And the nice thing is, when my mind is idle, it sometimes runs on autopilot. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King. This is mantra-like in my brain, and it just has been running there for 30 to 40 years. So I timed it, and I can do that in about 3 seconds. So 21 seconds gives me 7 repetitions of praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King. Well, Dante had his 9 circles of hell, and this is my 7 circles of Revelation. Dan, on Easter, you read a marvelous passage out of Revelation. But so I'll say it 7 times as I wash my hands. The first one, I'm thinking about the one who sits on the throne and the Lamb. And then I'm thinking about the circle beyond that, the living creatures, the elders who are falling down and worshiping before him. And then the third circle, the myriads and the myriads of angels that are around it. One of my professors, Robert Coleman, that I was a teaching assistant for, said, everybody reads Revelation to see what's going to change on the earth. You ought to read Revelation for what stays the same in heaven. Because the only thing that seems to change in heaven is the size of the groups that are bringing praise to the Lord. The fourth circle is the church on earth, and I tend to think of you all, my brothers, or I'll think of someone in my shepherd group. Fifth circle is local outreach, the things that Immanuel Bible Church is doing right here in our local community. I'll think of Christian Embassy or of Assist Pregnancy or FCA or one of those groups. The sixth circle is one of our global missionaries, and I try to bring someone to mind as I'm washing my hands there on my 6th time through. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King. And then the 7th one is all of the nations streaming to the Lord. This is the great hope of the Bible, and the great vision in Revelation is the nations that are bringing their allegiance streaming to the Lord. And so I'm working my way through the nations. I've gotten most of the way through Africa. I'm about to go up to Europe. And I figure over the course of this shutdown, I should be able to get through all of our missionaries about 4 times and all of the nations of the world at least once.
Amen.
That's cool.
That's redeeming the time right there.
Well, thank you for that, Michael, and thanks for joining us. And thank you, Immanuel, for joining us here on Third Hour. We'll see you again soon.